Good morning, everybody. I'm Sonia Davis Bay with Gwinnett Family Violence Task Force. I am the Vice President, and we are blessed to close out Mental Health Awareness Month with a doctor. There's a doctor in the house, y'all. I would like to introduce Dr. Shatel Francis.
Hey, everybody.
Do you mind if I call you Shatel?
You can call me Shatel. It's fine.
Okay. All right. And you guys know that while we've been in this COVID-19 pandemic, that there has been a surge of cases, of domestic violence cases while in lockdown. And we wanted to make sure that we continue bringing you great information. And I'm going to have Shatel go ahead and introduce herself and let us know what agency she currently works for.
Yes. So good morning, everyone. I am Shatel Francis. I am the Crisis Mental Health Advocate of Partnership Against Domestic Violence. I also serve as the co-chair of the Fatality Review for the Fulton County Task Force. And I also, in my great amount of spare time, I teach in the counseling program at Mercer University.
Awesome. I was an undergrad at Mercer. Wonderful. Go Bears.
Go Bears.
All right. And can you just explain a little bit more about your educational background?
Absolutely. So I have an undergraduate degree in psychology with a minor in African studies from the University of Miami.
Mm-hmm.
I have a master's degree in mental health counseling from Nova Southeastern University. And then I have a PhD from Mercer University in counselor education and supervision. And while at Mercer, you do have to have a specialization. So my specialization is in crisis, trauma, and torture from the University of Maryland.
Okay. And what led you to get into that type of work?
So me working in domestic violence has been completely haphazard.
Okay.
When I started in the field, I knew I wanted to be a therapist really early on. We're talking like middle school. I knew I wanted to be a therapist. But at that time, I wanted to do forensic work. And then I saw my first crime scene and I was like, nope, not for me, can't do it. So then I switched over and I wanted to do some autism work. And when I started doing that, it just broke my heart. Like I just knew I could not emotionally deal with that every day.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm a big proponent of if you're not able to do the work, don't do it. You're gonna just re-traumatize and cause more trouble than you will cause good. So I was paired with an internship in my master's program in Fort Lauderdale at Women in Distress of Broward County, and that was my first experience with domestic violence. And my supervisor, may she rest in peace, Barbara. Miss Barbara was amazing. She exposed me to everything domestic violence, gave great training, and that's how I got exposed to domestic violence work, and I have been in love with doing this work ever since.
Okay. So I would really like to go ahead and get into about the stigma regarding mental health. Can you explain what that is?
Of course. So there's, I think, two large chunks of why people kind of stay away from mental health and they don't talk about it. One is the stigma of being crazy, right? So in our communities, we all have a crazy uncle or a crazy aunt who, when they came to family gatherings, everyone was like, oh God, here goes such and such a person. And as you get the training, you get more exposure, you realize that person was suffering, whether it be from drug use, alcohol use, depression, PTSD. We know we have a lot of vets that went untreated once they returned to the country. I mean, you just had it in your family. So that's part of the stigma. It was us and them, right? And us, we didn't have mental health issues. They did, and they were crazy. So some of we have that in our community. And then you add to that just misinformation, not knowing what proper diagnoses are, knowing that there's help out there. Some communities, especially, I'm from the Virgin Islands, which is a very, very small territory. We didn't talk about mental health care. Thank God we're doing it now. But if you come from like more smaller communities, rural communities, Black and brown communities, we just don't talk about mental health care. So I think the misinformation about what mental health is, how important it is, that it's connected to physical health, I think that's really the biggest stigma that we're facing right now with people actually getting access and gaining access to mental health care.
Okay. So is therapy only for those people who are suffering with those type of mental health illnesses?
Absolutely not. Everyone should have a therapist. Every therapist has a therapist.
Oh, okay.
We have to realize that sometimes we have more problems than resources. And
Mm-hmm.
that's really where mental health care comes into play. Sometimes we're just overwhelmed. We have things called adjustment disorders where
Okay.
things just change. And that's what's happening with what I call the after times. So the COVID times.
Mm-hmm.
We were not planning for this. This came out of nowhere. So anyone that's having issues adjusting to what we call our new normal, having to wear masks and gloves and stay 6 feet apart and stay away from your loved ones, even that in and of itself can cause someone to need mental health care, because our resources, and I'm talking about emotional resources, our support systems, just were not built for things like this. So you don't have to have a diagnosable disorder. It's just someone to talk to go over your problems and make sure that you're okay. And you don't even have to go every week. That's another piece of misinformation. Some people go every other week. Some people just do a check-in every month. So it just depends on what you work out with your therapist.
Okay, and so I heard you were kind of explaining a little bit about what would happen if I went to therapy on a regular basis. Can you get a little bit more into that?
Absolutely. So therapy is a little bit nuanced. What people don't realize, you can get therapy almost anywhere now, which is really convenient. Some therapists are in hospital settings. So when you walk in, and I'm the one that jumps to the top of my head is the
Mhm.
Grady Nia Project, which is a collaboration with Emory University and Grady Hospital. And Dr. Nadine Klaslow, that's one of the places I trained in my master's program. It feels very clinical because it's in Grady.
Mhm.
But when you get to the actual NIA project floor and you get into the therapy room, you forget that you're in a hospital setting because it's very warm, very vibrant. You see a lot of people that are struggling just like you are. So you have your hospital settings. You also have your private practice settings or your group practice settings. And those look more like what you see on TV. There's sometimes a couch there,
Mhm.
whether you're laying or you're sitting up. Very warm. Again, you may see your therapist shingles, so their degrees and certifications hanging on the wall. Some have incense, some don't. Some have candles, some don't. And then we even have in-home and telehealth now, which is really, really great, where you don't have to be inconvenienced of leaving your home, where your therapist just meets with you. You can wear your PJs if you want to.
Right.
It's all about being comfortable. So you can get different experiences in different settings. Kind of what goes across the board though is your first session is going to go over what therapy feels like, what it looks like, um, limits of practice. So your therapist is going to tell you things like what they're allowed to do based on their training, what they're not allowed to do if they have to refer you out, and what people I think are the most afraid of, whether or not they have to consider getting outside help. So in Georgia, that's called 1013. But that's really rare. We don't get to that point or break confidentiality unless we really have to. We try to work around that. So
Okay.
your therapist will spell all of that out for you, and at any point you can walk away.
All right. Can I expect like a timeline of when I'm going to be better?
That is hilarious. I've never had that question before. So your therapist can never promise, hey, you're going to be great in 6 sessions.
Uh-huh.
Just something that we cannot guarantee for you. What we can tell you is what your insurance is going to cover. So
Mm-hmm.
some insurance providers give you 6 sessions, some give you 10, some give you 12, and we still find ways to work around that. So don't feel as though, all right, I got to be better in these 6 sessions. Sometimes it's 6 sessions per year. So your therapist is going to try to spread those out as much as possible just to make sure you're doing check-ins or fill-ins. So we like things like homework. We like you to go home with some self-care books and worksheets. We have support groups. We have organizations that don't have limits and don't use insurance.
Mm-hmm.
So those are things that we tap into, and we want to be sure that you have a realistic picture. What we will do is check in. So most
Okay.
therapies give you some type of, hey, we're going to check in every third session or every second session, every other session, to kind of see where you are, because you get to set your goals. That's the beauty of therapy. We're not expecting you to go from a state of complete depression to I'm great tomorrow. That's not what we're looking for. Some people is, I just want to be able to get out of bed and brush my teeth today. And that's your goal. And those things evolve as you go through therapy. And that's the beauty. You're working together. Your therapist is not going to push you more than what you're ready to handle.
Okay, so it sounds like it's something that's over time and something that I have to put a lot of work into to become better. And nobody's going to tell me exactly what to do. It's just that taking your advice and moving forward.
Absolutely. And what we tell our clients is that the client is the expert.
Okay.
You're just there to be, we're there just there to be part of your journey.
Hmm.
And you're the captain of the ship.
I like that. And we know, doing the work that we do, that there is an intersect with mental health and victims of domestic violence. How would you describe an intimate partner relationship?
So an intimate partner
I'm sorry, intimate partner violence relationship.
Got you. Intimate partner violence relationship. So the textbook definition is essentially a pattern of harmful, hurtful behavior in which one partner attempts to get power and control over over the other partner, right? So essentially, that person doesn't have to be bigger in stature.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have to be male. I know some of these are some of the myths that we try to debunk. That person doesn't have to be of a different gender, because we have same-sex relationships, we have teen relationships that we look at. So it's just one partner using tactics to establish power and control over another partner.
Okay. What are some of those tactics that they might use?
Oh, so there's a whole wheel. I can spend the whole interview doing that part.
Mm-hmm.
So some of those things might be finances. That person may drain your bank account or steal money, take your check. We've seen a lot where the person becomes the payee. If you get SSI or SSDI, they want to be your payee so they can control the money. We have tactics such as using the children. So essentially, they'll involve children in adult matters. They'll say, "Oh, mommy made me do this," or "Daddy made me do this." Keeping children away. In the state of Georgia, we have a whole thing called legitimation, a law, which again, I could spend the whole interview talking about that. We use legitimation like a weapon. We have physical violence. That's the physical and sexual are usually the ones that come to the top of individuals' head. So we have the hitting, punching, kicking. Something that we've been studying a lot lately is strangulation, and how strangulation has long-term effects, whether you feel it in that moment or not. Isolation is usually number one, and it's usually a red flag as well, trying to get you away from what was your support system. So that's your family, your friends, your coworkers, telling you things like, "Oh, that person is jealous of you. They don't want the best for you." And then you start to go away from those relationships. So there are lots of tactics that we see individuals use to assert that power and control.
Okay. And how does mental health impact those that have experienced domestic violence?
Got you. So essentially, mental health and DV or IPV has a really toxic and bidirectional relationship. We see that individuals who have a mental health diagnosis or could meet criteria, because not everyone has a diagnosis, right? We like to assume that we know what an individual's diagnosis is, but that can meet criteria. Those individuals usually have some type of trauma in their background, and that trauma very often is domestic violence. We have a few great articles that talk about mass shootings and how almost every single mass shooter in the United States has a history of being exposed to domestic violence or child abuse in their history. So that, that was not shocking to me, but that we never put those pieces together.
Yeah, that's very interesting. That's very interesting. Seeing that mass shootings is a big deal here in the United States.
Huge deal. And then it also goes the opposite direction. So individuals who have a mental health diagnosis are also more at risk to become a victim of domestic violence as well. So again, we have this really toxic bi-directional relationship. And I think the statistics are something like 17% of all individuals diagnosed with depression, and it's like 18% of all individuals diagnosed with anxiety have some type of history of domestic violence or are currently in a domestic violence relationship. So it can go, it's kind of like chicken or the egg, which one comes first,
right.
but they are very closely connected. And we suggest that anyone that goes for a DV treatment have that conversation about what their mental health looks like, because domestic violence can also initiate or exacerbate domestic violence. So we have this nature versus nurture argument, again, which one came first, but also if you go for mental health treatment to talk about your exposure to trauma and domestic violence, because sometimes we're treating one when we should be treating both.
Okay. Shatel, can you tell me, does the length of time of a person being in a domestic violence relationship make a difference on a person's mental health and their ability to leave?
No, not at all. We have seen some relationships where they met last week, and that in the person who is labeled as the victim, we like to say survivor. The survivor is completely a mess when it comes to mental health. I mean, they meet criteria. It's almost like checking the boxes. Sometimes it's scary. Depression, PTSD, anxiety, adjustment disorder, self-harm, substance abuse, alcohol. I mean, it obviously some of those you can't meet criteria for in the DSM, but you see the trajectory starting. So the length of time being in a relationship does not really matter. What we have seen though is there's some connection between the level of abuse. So sometimes it's the higher or the more severe the abuse is, the more severe the mental health component then becomes.
Okay. And how does that impact children who have witnessed incidents of domestic violence?
So there's a lot of, and most people are familiar with the ACEs study and the components of the ACEs study, which just talks about the outcomes of children being exposed to different things. And trauma and domestic violence is one of those things. And that list is ridiculously long. So I'll give you some of them. I'm sure I'm going to be missing ones. So guys, don't hold it against me. I'm sure I'll be missing some things off the list. But you have those physical symptoms. So you have things like bedwetting, because most children regress to a previous developmental stage that they had already successfully passed. So you have bedwetting, you have nightmares, you have insomnia. Boys are more likely to become survivors of domestic violence or initiators or abusers of domestic violence. Girls are more likely to become survivors of domestic violence once exposed in childhood. You have poor performance in school, you have headaches, poor social relationships, issues with abandonment, social anxiety, not being able to make friends. So there's just a long list of what happens to children exposed to domestic violence. The great thing, and there's some great research I was reading in Psychology Today, I believe it was last month, that if there's intervention, the likelihood of that continuing past intervention is slim to none.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's
but children, it's the great news, right?
That's really good.
Super doom and gloom. But the great news is that if we have intervention, we can kind of break some of those, what we know in our communities as generational curses that kind of pass through generation to generation. But DV is a learned behavior. So, we have to also believe that we can unlearn it once we intervene.
Right. And will it, I guess you touched on this a little bit, but will it cause them to have any issues with socializing, children, and dating, or other mental health problems later in life? Oh, I think we froze here a little bit. Shatel? Hey? Hey, I think your internet froze on us. Just let me know when you get back. All right, we're having a little technical difficulties. We'll be right back. All right, we're back from that little commercial break, and we were talking about socializing and dating as children get older, if they've been involved with that type of trauma. How can does it affect them?
Yes, so it absolutely affects them. Like I was saying, you can have a long list. I can take up the entire interview with that list, and I'm going to miss some. So people, please don't feel me for missing some things. But you have those complaints. So you have stomach aches, headaches, bedwetting. So most children do regress to a developmental stage in which they had previously successfully passed. So you have bedwetting, insomnia, nightmares. You can have lower school performance. You can have social anxiety or abandonment issues. You can have inability to make friendships. Statistically, boys are more likely to be survivors or perpetrators of abuse, and girls are more likely to be survivors of abuse. So there's a long laundry list of effects from witnessing domestic violence or intimate partner violence as a child. Self-harm, higher rates of suicidal behavior. But I do want to say, I don't want to sound all doom and gloom. I was reading an article on USA Today and Psychology Today that actually talked about if we have intervention, we can turn that behavior around or stop it really early on. So I don't want to sound, completely awful and
Right.
that we have nothing that we can do to intervene, but there are ways that we can intervene with children to stop that cycle.
And I know people always talk about, oh, why did she stay? She could have left. She could have did this. He could have did that. why do people choose to stay in these type of relationships?
Yeah, absolutely. So there are a myriad of reasons that people can decide to stay in a relationship. Um, one that we tend to forget is that they're in love. I mean, that's the bottom line. They
Yeah.
love this person. They want the abuse to stop, not the relationship to stop. So they're doing everything in their power to get that relationship back to where it's supposed to be. And part of the issue is that the cycle of violence doesn't leave room for that, right? So the survivor is going through all these hoops to try to keep an individual from hitting on them
Mhm.
or being verbally abusive, financially abusive, and no matter what they do, I mean, they just cannot control someone else's behavior. So love, one reason. Finances or resources. They may not have the money to support themselves, or if they have children, the money to support their children. They may not have a steady place to live, a steady job, steady income, or support. If we think of faith communities, a lot of our faiths tell us, you know, leave it at the foot of the cross, right? Things like that. Or if you're married, you're married for life until death do us part. So there is this innate feeling that I have to stay. I'm legally obligated to my faith to stay.
Mhm.
Some religions also say we don't involve other people. I've had clients from various tribes in Africa who specifically say that the tribesmen deal with it, the elders deal with it. So you stay until the elders can figure it out. So there's things like that. We also have to consider statistically, when an individual leaves a relationship, there's a 75% higher chance that they could be killed. So that's something that our survivors are considering. I don't want to be killed, especially if there's a firearm in the home or that abuser has access to a firearm. They don't want to be harmed when they're trying to leave. So that's just a small picture of, you know, what are some of those barriers to staying in that relationship.
Okay. And so, as a community, how can we serve victims or people who have gone through this type of trauma? How can we serve them better? What can we do?
Yeah. So part of it is being an ear, just listening. Sometimes someone is dropping clues to see if they can trust you. Right now, we're facilitating a support group with women who have left their abusive partner very recently, just got a protective order. And one of the things that they say to us all the time is, I don't have friends. I have been isolated for so long that I don't know how to make friends. And what I do is I test some of my coworkers. Like I'll say something to see if they pick up on it. So part of it is knowing what signs that person is saying things like, I'm afraid to go home, or my children were crying all weekend when I did a custody exchange. But know that you can't probe too much. When that person is ready to tell you, they'll tell you. So be a listening ear, be non-judgmental. That's another big one. Sometimes we make comments like, oh, you must like it. Like I've
Mm.
lost lots of friends, especially on social media, where they post jokes about domestic violence. I'm like, nothing about domestic violence is funny. This person is there's another person exerting power and control over them that they cannot control that in their life. So be a listening ear, be non-judgmental, and I think the biggest one is know the resources out there. So there are plenty of local and national resources out there, whether it's a website, whether it is an app. We have a lot of apps now. There's literally an app for everything. If there's an app that person feels comfortable using, you can remain anonymous on a lot of those apps. So just knowing what the resources are is just great for community members to help our survivors.
Do you happen to know any of those apps right off the top of your head?
So off the top of my head, I know one that's really good that covers both domestic violence and mental health is 211. 211
211.
has a great app. United Way, so 211 is part of United Way. They have a great app, and that's used just about anywhere. If you look up United Way, they have resources. There is, I know, Viewpoint Health is working on an app. I believe it's already launched. So they have resources available for mental health. We have resources electronically, but it's not necessarily an app for PADV. So I won't give out that false information. But our supporters, GCADV, the national hotline for domestic, I mean, they all have apps. So if you just look in your app store for domestic violence or mental health apps, there are those available for you.
Okay, definitely. And as we wrap up our interview, do you have any advice that you would give a victim that's currently in a domestic violence or intimate partner violence relationship? What could you say?
Absolutely. So one, I think, know that you're worthy. That's the first thing. Know that you're worthy of love. No matter how long you've been in your relationship, we have had 80-year-old women come to our office and say, I have been with this person since I was 16 years old. I don't know life without them. And we tell them, that's okay. We're here to help. So know that you're worthy of having a healthy, loving relationship. And even if you don't want to be in a healthy, loving relationship, you want to be by yourself, you can do that too. Know that we are here to help 24 hours a day. We have a crisis line available, so I'll give that number out. We have our Safe Families office, which is what I work in. We're not 24 hours, and we are specifically in Fulton County, but we're going to find a way to help you if we have those resources. We have, I'm trying to think of all the other things. You're not alone. Know that you're not alone. There are, I think a great place to start is a support group. We run one of those. You can call me specifically, 470-733-0079. And that support group is specifically for individuals who kind of want to hear the opinion of others, to know that they aren't alone before they make that step. I did mention our crisis line, so let me say it before I forget to give that number. So it's 404-873-1766. You can call our crisis line so we can do some safety planning with you. Even if you decide to stay in the relationship, we can safety plan with you. We can talk to you about the resources that are out there if you plan to leave, getting a plan together, again, because the statistics just say that you're more likely to be harmed if you decide to leave, and we want you to have a plan. So you're not alone. We're here to help. I've given you some resources. I've given you my number. If you need more resources, go ahead and hit me up.
Oh man, I really appreciate you giving us all this really great information. It's very important to understand what domestic violence victims are truly going through, so that way you can not put that judgment onto them and be someone that can help them. Do you have any upcoming events that you would like to plug?
When do we not have events? So the great thing about PDV is that we're the largest DV agency. This side, I think we're like the 5th largest in the nation or something like that. So we're pretty big.
Wow.
We always have events going on. So we do have, we actually have a summit coming up. So last year, a couple of us got together with Viewpoint Health, and we were like, we need to highlight the intersection of domestic violence and mental health. We had the last one last year, the first one last year in November. It was such a hit. We're doing it again this November, barring COVID. So we're waiting how that's going to shake out. But right now, it's going to be in November. Once we decide what that's going to look like, I can forward the flyer to you so everyone can have access to that. Or you can email me for updates, shatel.francis@pedv.org. In September, we have our Teen Summit, which is not just for teens. We do focus on teens, but there are some great gems that drop in there. That's coming up in September. We also have our Hearts for Hope Gala. That is our biggest fundraiser for PDV. If tickets are going to be available, hoping that everything goes well, because it was supposed to be last month. We did have to move it just for safety purposes. We want to keep everyone safe. So that's also going to be in September. So we have lots of events coming up. June and July is more of a waiting to see what's going to happen. But those are our 3 big ones that I can think of off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Thank you for everybody tuning in with myself and Dr. Shatel Francis. She has given you plenty of information. She's given you her personal number, the hotline to Partnership Against Domestic Violence. If you are in need of help, please reach out. And again, make sire you guys follow Gwinnett Family Violence Task Force on all of our social media outlets for any upcoming events and interviews. Actually, we have another interview coming up this Thursday at 11 with survivor TJ Blake as she tells us her story. So everyone stay tuned and check us out. Thank you.
Thank you.